Over the last few years, there have been many in the mainstream and corporate media who have declared that Marvel is just fine despite what you see with your lying eyes. They're okay. They'll turn it around. It's no problem. No biggie. That, of course, has become a much more difficult narrative to display, although we believe that Deadpool 3 will likely be successful and they'll try it again by saying, see. We think, of course, that is going to be not the norm, but rather an exception to the now rule. And why do we think that? Well, because we've got data, we've got a chart, and the chart shows that up until the last few years, Marvel basically never lost a dime on a single movie. They made lots and lots of money instead. And suddenly, all that changed dramatically. We're going to show you the graphic. We're going to show you the numbers. And you decide for yourself whether you think Marvel is just fine and dandy anymore. Hello, folks. It's your friendly neighborhood WDW Pro here, bringing you all the news that should be fun, explaining entertainment, and keeping you ahead of the culture curve. Today, we're talking about Marvel and the fact that all of a sudden, they can't make money. They're losing money, tons of money. And that never, ever, ever happened before. The mainstream media, of course, likes to tout the big numbers, but they don't tell you the big budgets behind them. And they don't tell you that it's extraordinarily difficult for Marvel to get away from those big budgets. Today, we're going to examine it. We're going to break it down and show you with graphics how all of this works so that when someone tries to say to you in an article or a video that Marvel was the biggest success of 2023, you'll know exactly what they mean, and it's not what they want you to think. Let's just say right now that Marvel, as of late, has not been having a very good time. They have suddenly found themselves unable to make the break-even mark on profitability, where their budgets are so high that they cannot exceed the profits now, or exceed what they need to make. We had not seen this since Incredible Hulk, so it's quite fascinating to be in a situation now where their latest movies, and we're talking about Black Widow, we're talking about Captain Marvel, we're talking, well, the Marvels, Captain Marvel 2, right? But the Marvels, we're talking about Eternals, and one more film, uh,
Shang-Chi.
Shang-Chi, all failing to make it to profitability. So, Jonas,
There
I see
you
you
go.
pulled that up. Excellent. Thank you, Jonas. I appreciate that so much. And we're
I
actually going to
forgot
drop
Shang-Chi
everybody
even
else so we can
existed.
see that even in higher resolution. Jonas, do you have the ability to zoom in on that, or is it? Will it not go?
Sure. One thing I'm noticing that Endgame is very difficult to find on this particular graphic. I don't know that
Yes,
the
yes, yes.
resolution will increase,
No, you're
but
actually doing a great job.
yeah, right here I
So,
would say that's where Endgame should be, and then Spider-Man Far From Home is right about this. That can't be true. Is it really overshadowed? Anyways, let's move on.
well, what I really want to show people is if you take a look, folks, if you're able to see a screen, if you're driving, and we don't suggest you do that then, so don't look down. But if you look at the line that is below our line in the middle, so the one that's actually lower, that goes all the way from the left to the right on the screen, that is the break-even point for these movies. And so they've taken into account the budgets of these films, and this goes into profitability because oftentimes what you will hear people talk about is, well, such and such movie made this amount of money and therefore it's a success. And it's like, well, actually, we're looking for profitability. We're looking to see was the investment returned well based on what they thought. So you want to get at least a 15% return on investment. And if these films come underneath that line, well, it's a real problem. And so for Marvel, you're going to notice a couple of things that are really interesting. First of all, Iron Man, the original one, barely broke even in terms of profitability. Incredible Hulk did not. But then since then, there was this very nice rise in terms of the return on investment for Marvel films. The Avengers, for example, when the Avengers came out, that was a massive success for Marvel, and it actually increased the baseline profitability of all these films. And when you're wondering why do companies invest in particular franchises, they're looking for a profitability as well as developing an ecosystem of merchandising opportunities, video game opportunities, etc. And so you've got that baseline increase there. And so it goes on, it goes on, it goes on. And then you had another increase as we got closer to the end of phase three and as the Spider Man films really took off. Captain Marvel, you'll also notice, is up there. And that may have actually been one of the most damaging incidents to Marvel because they kind of tricked people. They gave the bait and switch to get people to go see that film, And in doing so, I think they what would you say? They eroded the trust in the fans because fans went and saw something that they didn't care for, that sort of brought in intersectionality when fans really just wanted to know what was going to happen with the end of Phase 3. The results of that we can see in the most recent films, and they are all bottom right. And when I say bottom right, they don't have to be in the bottom, except that they're no longer making the same profitability levels as earlier Marvel. Significantly, we've got the films we told you about. Uh, we've got Eternals, Black Widow. We've got, of course, Ant-Man Quantumania, and then the Marvels is even worse. But all of those films failed to make break-even point, and Shang-Chi either broke even and stayed right there or barely made any money at all. And all of this is pointing to the idea that Marvel is no longer the profitability behemoth that Disney once had, that Kevin Feige once had. And we're even to the point now where Kevin Feige, who just a few years ago would have been seen and deemed as one of the greatest creative leaders in the industry of all time, he now presides over the biggest flop of all time, potentially. We'll see how that plays out with Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny, as well as Wish, but not good in the last few years. And so I wanted to open up to the panel for our first point of discussion. How long do you think that this can go on before they make really significant changes? This to me would be, this is a very major warning sign to everybody at Marvel that they've went from being at the highest levels of profitability amongst the industry to now they're losing money at an alarming clip. Your thoughts?
I think I don't think they're ever gonna have profitability again with Marvel as long as Kevin Feige's in charge.
All right, and
He's
explain
drank the Kool-Aid
why.
and it's ruined.
So, in
Sorry?
Endymion, though, let me ask you this, because this is one of the things that we have looked at a number of times, and that is that if you took Michael Jordan, even today, right? Many people consider him to be the greatest basketball player of all time. If you took Michael Jordan and you put him out on the basketball court, he's still a competent basketball player. His knees may be gone. I have no idea in terms of his athletic abilities now. I'm sure that he's still amazing, but Michael Jordan still would know how to play basketball at the very highest level. How in the world is Kevin Feige unable to make movies that at least break even after what we saw? Like, even via osmosis, you would think that he would pull forth the ability to make good movies from all the people that he's watched. So what
I
killed it?
just think it's what killed it's usually it's identity politics and pandering. And it's what Nerdrotic calls the MCU. It's just they basically took a hobby, not a hobby really, a property that is mostly male dominated, male funded. And one of the examples I use in my videos is sort of like what's happening to Marvel and Disney and Star Wars and all of that. It would be like if something like Sephora suddenly just went, we're not making makeup anymore for women. We're just going to make makeup for straight men.
Well,
And
Endymion,
if
this
you're
seems a little
womanly,
bit more realistic than I thought the example was going to be. I seem to recall
yeah,
something like that having happened.
yeah, and then that's sort of like what it is. It's sort of they've taken these brands that are, like I said, male dominated, male supported, and they kind of went like, we don't want you anymore. And it's also what I've been talking about a lot of my videos too is that a lot of companies chase the modern audience, but the thing is, the modern audience doesn't exist, so they're chasing this phantom group that there's nothing to make from them really, right? Like we saw with the Marvels, the Marvel was created for the modern audience, and like barely anybody showed up. So I think if you look at Marvel 2008 to 2019, pretty much that was made for the male dominated audience or in general, right? And I also talked about before in some of my videos that if you want to talk about what women want in terms of like Marvel movies and stuff, they actually would likely want exactly what the men want, which is competent male characters. And they don't really want to see these insufferable girl bosses, but they keep doing it anyway. It's not working. So I think what's not working in general is just they keep making things for an audience that clearly doesn't exist. And that's why they're losing so much money. And it's for Star Wars, for example, it's gotten to the point where Star Wars has entered apathy and fans just don't care anymore. I feel like Marvel's not there yet. Marvel still has people that care, but they are entering that Star Wars level where they will become apathetic too. And then no one's going to care anymore at all. It's like, oh, another Marvel movie like bombed. Who cares? Right. And they have to make sure they don't get there because Star Wars, like I said, is already there. and you saw like Ahsoka's failing. No one cares about Mandalorian anymore. It's just
Well, in Demion, let me give you an example. I think you're exactly on the mark, but to give you an idea of how apathetic the market is for Star Wars right now, the big news that Jeff Snyder was reporting, I'm still skeptical, although I really like what Snyder usually says, and so I'm sure he has sources on this. I find it difficult to believe, but I'll happily hop on board if it's true. But he came out and said that the Mandalorian season 4 was now going to be transformed into a movie, and it was going to be the first Star Wars movie out. And so the funny thing about this, though, Endymion, is that I didn't cover that in the traditional way. I didn't make a video about Mandalorian season 4 becoming a movie. I made a video about that not having any interest at all, because that was the angle, that was the news. It wasn't news that they might try to do that or that rumor was out there. The news was that nobody cared, that news hit the web and nobody cared whatsoever. I mean, it was talk about just a miserable outing in terms of a rumor. But Script Doctor, I want to go to you. You've got an MD in fixing these sorts of things. And Script, I'm just curious, from a writer's standpoint, where has Marvel gone so wrong in the last few years? Whereas we can see they were on, I mean, even with the Spider-Man films, it's almost like an exponential increase in profitability and then just dropped off a cliff. What is going on here?
Well, it comes down to basically choices at the top level. Now, it's quite fine that other people are happy to reiterate what has been known and topic on ideas from other channels like Nerdrotic, Critical Drinker, etc. They all have valid points. But one of the things that you have to understand about Hollywood is that they don't see it as them pandering or trying to change a franchise. How they view this is that they see an untapped market, which is that they purchased a boys brand. It's caught a lot of boys brands, but they're not getting girls. And they think that's 50% more potential profit if they can approach them and get them involved as deeply as the male audience. Now, that is just normal, basic marketing strategy to try and hit all your quadrants of your potential customers. That is the motivation.
So let me ask you a question about that, Script.
Well, 1 second. I just want to get to this fine point here. That is their main motivation when it comes to that. Now, the thing that really hurts them is Kevin Feige had an eye for talent, but it seems like he's gone blind recently because he has burned out some of the founding writers that were used to create this rise of the MCU, and has hired other ones that are on the rise, but they don't have their own agency to actually knock out of the park quality films. They are incredibly overseen by Kevin Feige and at the time Victoria Alonso and Joe Esposito and all those people to shape something that is unnatural to what made the brand good. There's nothing wrong conceptually with any of those movies at the end of those lists. Like, the ideas are fine. The problem is the execution, and the problem is the fact that they're not hiring the correct talent to execute that in an honorable way to the franchise itself. There's no argument saying that you can't have a Carol Danvers character that's charming, powerful, strong, inventive, and likable. The problem is that the people that they've hired to do that failed to deliver on that promise that we as fans were expecting from these characters. Same thing with Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania. There's nothing wrong saying, hey, let's go to the quantum realm and explore that, and let's go up against a villain of Kang. But when you have producers wanting to be writers, manipulating young writers that are willing to do anything you say so that they can get their next job and get named in the trades and get more opportunities to tell the stories that they want to do outside of Disney, you're not going to get the product you want. As I mentioned in a recent video, you have Stephen McFeely and Chris, I forgot his last name just now. Sorry, Christopher Marcus. They wrote 9 MCU films. Or sorry, they wrote 6 MCU films and a television show in 9 years. That is incredibly difficult to pull off. And the quality did decline towards the end. But that's basically burning out your talent. The talent that has written the most MCU content of any of the writers out of the 30 films. Where are the other writers that can meet that level? Why are there not other screenwriters who are doing well in other genres coming over to Marvel? One aspect is that they're probably too expensive because, again, while the budgets explode, those budgets are exploding in other departments. They're not exploding in the talent department, aside from a couple of actors here and there. But definitely when it comes to like Simu Liu of Shang-Chi, the cast of the Eternals, the cast of the Marvels, they're not breaking the bank for Marvel in comparison to what RDJ, Chris Hemsworth, and Chris Evans were getting at the peak of their career. So they're skimping on money on the creative side of things in the early stages and basically just writing blank checks in the post-production stages. And that's where you're getting a whole bunch of lackluster quality.
So then do you think this long gap that we have here is going to lead to an improvement?
No, because they're not announcing anything new. One of the caveats of Disney since Disney took over Marvel is that Disney does not like to really hire outside talent to come work on their projects. They have their 10 favorites that worked with them before that they'll keep using again and again because they play well with the team. You have Michael Waldron, who was a talented writer on Rick and Morty. He created a show called Heels, which was co-written with him and Tim O'Malley. That is way better than it has any right to be for an amateur wrestling show. When he's unsupervised by Disney, he can actually dish out some quality. But when he's under Disney supervision, you get WandaVision, you get Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness. You're not really satisfied with what's going on there. And that really just shows an example of how much control Disney wants over these properties when they really need to give a little bit more authorship to the writing and directing team that they hire so that they can actually deliver on something that audiences want to see and hit those quadrants that they did prior to essentially the Endgame and Far From Home.
So just because I know I'm still interrupting Pro here. So Waldron is in charge of Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars, if those remain at the same names.
Correct.
Right. And do you think that the likelihood of studio interference is going up on those films or going down?
Well, based on the fear that Disney's facing right now, their only action they can do is have more interference. They don't know what's going on. They cannot see the forest for the trees themselves. They are in panic mode. And when someone is in a panic mode, especially a team leader is in a panic mode, they micromanage and control everything because they think they're the only ones that can solve it.
Well, this is a question for you, Script, but it's also to anybody else who'd like to weigh in on this. One of the issues I see here is that there's a fundamental disagreement that I have with this quadrant strategy. And that is that I think that most companies out there would recognize that there are particular properties, franchises that are geared to particular quadrants, and you really cannot easily, at least, and perhaps with some sort of genius you could, but you can't easily expand outside of that quadrant without alienating the quadrant that you had. And so an example might be that, well, let's take Marvel for now, and then I'll expand it in a moment. But with Marvel, it's not obvious to me that you can expand into, let's say, an older women demographic, right? And make these movies alluring to them without also alienating the demographic that probably doesn't go watch things that older women enjoy. And that's not to say that either group is wrong. It's to say that they have preferences and proclivities that don't necessarily overlap on a Venn diagram. And so
there's no shame think about for a wine mom not wanting to go see Rogue One, a Star Wars story.
Right. Correct. And this is as obvious to me as if you said, hey, Pro, why don't we make Hot Wheels, the toys, be exciting to 45-year-old women? And I just don't see a way to do that makes any sense to me. And so I would say, well, why aren't you enjoying the audience that you have, which is 5-year-old boys, and see if you can grow that, saturate the market more. So, Script, do you think this is ultimately a failure, and do you think that Marvel will recede back from this strategy? And again, open to the rest of the panel as well, please.
I don't think they're going to recede back from the strategy anytime soon, not with the current administration in charge. The other part too, and it's rightful to point this out, is literally the following week after Captain America: The Winter Soldier debuted, audiences, both men and women alike, were clamoring for a Black Widow spy thriller. And we didn't get one. And what we did get was definitely not in line with what we were expecting. So the audience is there. The question being is that if you want to branch out, you cannot abandon the core values of what that made that franchise good. You have to reinforce your brand. And the other part too is you don't want to manipulate your brand to target a market that's going to, of course, avert the one that built it. So if you do take a look at the numbers, and they are out there. I think it was between 25 and 45% of women on average would see an MCU film. That's a pretty good hold. And there's nothing wrong with that. And if you stayed the course, you'd have those are reliable numbers. And the biggest mistake I've seen with Disney, not just with Marvel, but also with Star Wars, is looking at those reliable numbers and saying those aren't good enough. And that's your mistake, because you want the reliable numbers to keep coming back, because they are going to tell their friends and family, and those numbers are going to grow. The percentages might be the same, but the numbers overall is going to grow. And I don't understand how a company like Disney botched that so terribly, considering some of the pedigree of their marketing department that they had, especially in the early 2010s.
You know what's funny is when I go to this quote, it's actually a quote from you, Script, that Disney takes about 10 years to kill anything they buy.
Yes.
That's accurate. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today. Thank you so much for joining us. It is always an honor and a privilege to share our time with you, and we mean it. Folks, if you wouldn't mind, on the way out the door, click that like button, share, subscribe, and when you click it, you stick it to the algorithms, the notification bell. Drop a comment down below. This should not be a conversation between the talking heads and talking voices here on YouTube, but rather it should be a community dialogue, and you're part of that. We're glad you are. Folks, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.